Hello and welcome to today's presentation, Optimizing Your Facility Sanitation Program to Protect Your Plant and Staff. Today's webinar is being presented by Virox Technologies, makers of Shield Disinfectants. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions at any time in the chat section located on the right-hand side of your screen. So without any further ado, let's get started. I would now like to introduce Troy Henderson, LP consultant, and Matt Buccioni, infection prevention and biosecurity expert. Over to you.
Thanks, Lara. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really want to keep this educational and beneficial for everyone. But as Lara mentioned, we do have a product in the cannabis space called Shield in about 100 facilities. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask after or send me an email or a LinkedIn message if you're curious to learn more about that. But for now, we're going to keep it educational, and I'll give it to Matt to take it off.
All right, so thanks. I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of an overview about who we are as Virox, makers of Shield. So we started as a company back in 1998. And at the time, there were a lot of kind of legacy disinfectant chemistries, products, technologies that had been around for quite a while. And a lot of these products didn't have necessarily the best safety profiles, and weren't necessarily the best to use in real world settings. Some of them took a long time to be effective. And so what Virox did is we came out with a new technology known as accelerated hydrogen peroxide, which was a safer and faster alternative to a lot of these older chemistries. And so from there, within the first few years of Virox, here in Ontario, we had the SARS epidemic hit. And as a result of that, we really saw cleaning and disinfection move from the healthcare space into the wider world. So into different, trains and stores and all these different environments where, traditionally people might not have thought about cleaning and disinfection. So as a result of that, it became really important to make sure that the product that people were using was safe and was user-friendly, in order to kind of protect people while being effective against pathogens. And so as a result, the Ministry of Health here in Ontario mandated the use of our products during the SARS epidemic. And so from there, we've kind of grown into a lot of different market segments, life sciences, dental, still very involved in healthcare, professional beauty, and one of the more recent ones is really moving into that cannabis space, seeing a need for cleaning and disinfection in those facilities. So a little bit about, before we kind of get started into that, about the accelerated hydrogen peroxide technology. So we've known for a long time that hydrogen peroxide is an effective disinfectant. But by itself, there's some problems that stop it from really being able to kill germs that we'd encounter in the real world. For instance, it tends to react, it tends to break down right away. And it by itself it's slow acting. So it's not really effective in real world settings. And so what accelerated hydrogen peroxide is it's taking that hydrogen peroxide and stabilizing it and making it into a safe disinfectant formulation. That is an alternative to a lot of older chemistries that have been used in the past. So now I'll take it over to Troy just to give a little bit of an overview about sanitation within cannabis.
Thanks, Matt. So yeah, I'm sure everyone knows the major reason why sanitation and disinfection is important. That's because Health Canada mandates that. It's part of their regulations. But there are other reasons why you want to have a robust and effective program. One of those being protecting your crop, and that's your product and your revenue right there. So a term that we see thrown around in the industry a lot is the clone success rate. So that is basically every clone you plant, how many of those are going to make it to that end product. And those can range from 50 to 99%, and those make a big difference, right? If you have a 99% clone success rate, 99% of your clones, your labor, all that effort that went into those plants is transferring to revenue, whereas maybe at 70%, you're losing 30% of that crop, which is a loss of potential revenue. So it's important for that. And even more recently, with the COVID pandemic, it's important to prevent outbreaks for the people in your facility too. There's good examples of other industries like the meat farmers and some of the bakeries that you've seen outbreaks, and it's just as important in cannabis to disinfect all your surfaces to ensure that that pathogen can't spread throughout your facility. So this next slide is the 7 steps of what you want to do when you're building your sanitation program. This is basically the journey of our presentation. We're going to go through these steps, look at the details and some of the key metrics inside of each, and hopefully leave you with a really robust idea of how to build that program when you're working in those facilities. So I'll give it to Matt to talk about the first one, which is responsibilities.
Yeah, so the importance of responsibilities and kind of determining that when you're building out your protocol is really the first thing that we always stress. And what Virox has experienced over the years in different markets is that when this piece is missing, oftentimes there's critical gaps in that infection prevention and cleaning and disinfection protocol. So one example from healthcare that we often talk about is one facility that we were working with where they have like a portable washroom unit, and the nursing staff had assumed that it was being done by the housekeeping or the environmental services workers, and they had assumed that the nursing staff were taking care of it, and as a result this was actually being missed. So that's just an example of why having a protocol kind of outlined that everyone's on board with is really that key first step in making sure that the facility is getting cleaned and disinfected properly. So in terms of moving on to how to actually get that protocol up and running, it really will depend on outlining the different levels of risk within a cannabis facility. And a lot of that comes down to what's actually happening, what's actually taking place in the different areas. And a good way to kind of break that down in the context of this industry is whether it's a GPP area or a non-GPP area. So are we dealing with growing rooms, packaging areas, rooms where a lot of like plant contact is taking place? And then, other areas that might be lower risk would be like staff lounges, kitchens, office areas, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as the market adjusts to the pandemic, we're actually seeing a lot of these staff lounges, lunchrooms. They're almost converting to a high risk area, and they're taking those extra steps in there to ensure safety. So when you're looking inside the facility too, as you can imagine, there's a lot of different facility types. So here I have some example. You can have a nursery, like large greenhouses, maybe an indoor vertical grow, and each of those you're going to have to decide how you're going to actually clean those spaces. As you can imagine, a greenhouse like that with large ceilings, maybe you're doing a perpetual harvest, so there's always plants in the room. You're going to have a lot different protocol than, let's say, an indoor grow where you're taking all the plants out of the room, harvesting all at once, and then doing a top to bottom clean. Other things you want to consider as well is, the processing stages of it. So you look here, trimming, for example, that's an area where you're definitely going to have a lot of resin buildup. So you have to remove that resin and disinfect the surface or equipment. And you make it all the way down to extraction, which is really tough, the sticky resin to remove there. And all of those processes, all of those areas, you're going to want different processes because it's a different task that you're doing. And here's more examples. So you have the automated trimmers. Those are a huge headache in the facility. I think probably every facility I've been inside, they're like, how do I clean my automated trimmer? Working your way down to packaging as well, a lot of the automated packaging as well. So that kind of goes to the discussion about what are you trying to, what's the goal you're trying to achieve? So are you trying to clean? So are you trying to clean a resin like a cannabis oil or some of that sticky resin, or a soil? So a soil could be the actual soil that you're growing in, but it's really just an umbrella term for all that organic matter, any debris in the room that you're going to try to remove. If you're trying to actually kill a pest or a pathogen, you want to pick a product for that as well. So a pathogen being bacteria, viruses, fungi, mold, and then there's pests like your spider mites, aphids, and stuff in that nature. And lastly, you want to consider how are these pathogens and pests being transferred, or what's their mode of transmission. So you look at powdery mildew. It's going to be in the air. It's going to be on your equipment. Humans are the largest vector of transportation inside facilities. So you're going to be wearing your PPE. You're going to want to increase your hygiene in facilities, especially in the high risk areas. And that's all to avoid a crop infection or crop failure, which you do not want to have.
Okay, so we'll get into a little bit about, we hear a lot of different terms thrown around when it comes to cleaning and sanitation. So we'll take a look at what some of these actually mean. So when we talk about a degreaser or a detergent, these products are intended to remove dirt and debris from a surface. So the intention of these products is really focused on that cleaning, that removal of soils, and it's not focusing on actually killing microorganisms, pathogens, or pests that might be on the surface. And so these products are not regulated in the way that disinfectants are, which we'll get into in a second. And what the regulations around that kind of state are that we don't want residue from cleaning products actually inserted onto the final product. So when we get into disinfectant, so Troy just mentioned a minute ago the difference between pathogens and pests. So when we're talking about disinfection in a cannabis facility, what we're really talking about is products that are going to be killing pathogens on surfaces and tools around a cannabis facility. And so these are regulated products by Health Canada. So a disinfectant manufacturer has to register the product with Health Canada and get a drug identification number. So every product should have one of those that's being used. And these are different from when we talk about pesticides, which are focusing on those pests that Troy mentioned. And that has a sort of separate regulatory aspect to it as well. And they carry a PCP as opposed to a DIN. So in terms of disinfection and killing different microorganisms, so let's look at, what are those different pathogens and, how easy or hard are they to kill compared to other different categories. So you can see this is kind of like a good, easy way to think about how to break these down. So we have envelope viruses on the bottom, and these are things like influenza, HIV, hepatitis B and C, moving up to bacteria, vegetative bacteria, which are a little bit harder to kill, like a salmonella, staphylococcus, fungi, which is probably the most significant category for cannabis facilities. So here we're looking at gray mold, powdery mildew. And so these are a little bit more resistant than these envelope viruses and some bacteria. And so when looking for disinfectant, you're going to want to look for one that kind of has a broad spectrum of pathogens that it's able to kill, so that it can go kind of high up this pyramid in terms of what it's capable of inactivating. So for instance, shield disinfectants will inactivate from the envelope viruses category at the bottom up to the mycobacteria as the kind of the more resistant organism. So when we talk about sanitizing and versus disinfection, also like to kind of clarify, what these terms are and what they mean. So when we talk about sanitizing, what we're really talking about is we're lowering the level of microorganisms, specifically bacteria, to levels that are considered safe for, let's say by a regulatory body or by some standards that you're setting. And so this might be a 3 to 5 log reduction against vegetative bacteria, depending on if it's going to be a food contact or a non-food contact sanitizing surface. But the important thing to keep in mind is that when we're dealing with sanitizing, we're only talking about bacteria. And for high-risk areas throughout your facility, sanitizing is actually not sufficient for what you're going to need for those areas. And so that's really where disinfection comes into the picture. So this is killing microorganisms, which can include also bacteria, but viruses and fungi as well. And we're looking at a 5 log reduction. So we're looking at killing 99.999% of these different organisms. And so for high-risk surfaces that we talked about earlier, so a lot of tools and surfaces in growing areas, this is going to be the standard of killing that is going to be required.
Yeah, and a good bringing some math into that too. So the 3 log reduction you're seeing for sanitizing, if you had say 100,000 bacteria on the surface, after sanitizing you'll have 100 left. Whereas if you had that same 100,000 bacteria and you disinfected, you'd only be left with 1 bacteria. So it is really important. It's 100 times more effective, and that's really important when you're trying to disinfect those high risk areas. So this image right here is actually from the CDC, And this is the metrics of how to choose your disinfectant or what to look for in a disinfectant. So we're going to go through a lot of these. A lot of them are pretty basic, like you want it to be non-toxic. And it is really sad to see a lot of facilities in Canada using toxic disinfectants and not having the appropriate environmental or PPE controls there. So like, for example, isopropyl alcohol, you'll probably see in every facility you go into. And actually WSPS, which is a labor board in Ontario, is actually cracking down as of this year on cannabis facilities in Ontario who are using excessive amounts of isopropyl and not with the right amount of PPE or environmental or engineering controls. So it's a big issue, and you don't have to check all the boxes here, but you want to find a product that, if you're going to have a score for each, it's going to have the highest score in the end. This is a really good thing to reference if you're building a program in your facility or looking for the product to choose. And we're going to go over some of the metrics in here in these slides. And the first one being contact time. So contact time is the amount of time needed for the product the amount of time the surface needs to stay wet with that product in order to achieve the claim you're going for. So let's say you have a disinfectant and it says it disinfects in 3 minutes. You have to apply that product to your surface and allow it to stay wet for 3 minutes. If it dries in 1 minute, then you're gonna have to reapply it until it reaches that contact time. So that's when you look at a product like isopropyl alcohol. It actually has a 5 to 10 minute contact time. If you want to make sure you're killing all of your fungi, it's going to be 10 minutes. And as we know, it dries in about a minute. So you'd have to actually sit there and reapply that product 10 times in order to achieve that contact time. And doesn't mean that it's not a bad option. It might be a little bit more labor intensive, but that if you wanted to be compliant with Health Canada regulations, you'd have to follow the label as that says that. So what you want to look for in contact time is a realistic contact time. If you can find a product that has a drying time of, let's say, 5 minutes and a contact time of 3 minutes, that'd be a realistic contact time. You can actually reach it in one application to save you a lot of time, and you're going to be a lot more compliant throughout your entire process. And right here, we have an example of some other commonly used disinfectants with their contact times and their drying times, and very few of them have a drying time that exceeds the contact time. So another thing. Oh, sorry, Matt. This is actually your slide. You can take this away.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
I'm getting excited there.
So I'll go over the difference between one-step versus two-step products, and what this comes down to is in cannabis facilities where there's a lot of dirt and a lot of organic residue, it's really important to have that cleaning step in addition to disinfection. And this can look, there's two different ways that this could work. Using a one-step product means that one product is going to be a cleaner and a disinfectant because it's a registered disinfectant product that has detergents built in. So it's almost like a 2-in-1 cleaner and disinfectant product. And so obviously you're going to want to remove any kind of major soils before cleaning and disinfecting. But with a one-step product, you don't need that separate detergent step before you disinfect. And so Shield is an example of a disinfectant that contains these detergents, this one-step product. But there are other ones out there. A two-step product is really adding that extra detergent pre-cleaning step before even applying the disinfectant. And so a lot of commonly used chemistries like isopropyl alcohol, for instance, would be one of those two-step processes. You'd want to use a detergent to clean and then use your isopropyl alcohol. Same thing with bleach and chlorine products in general. A lot of those may not have those detergents, and so you're going to need that extra step.
Yeah.
So another really important one that I think we kind of hinted at earlier is the issue of safety. So a lot of commonly used chemicals out there are associated with occupational health and safety issues. And a lot of this is because there used to be this assumption that if it's going to be effective against pathogens, that it's also going to be toxic to people. And we know now that this doesn't have to be true. And when we're looking for a disinfectant, we're going to want something that when it's used at its proper concentration, it's non-toxic and it's non-irritating and it's not associated with any kind of health concerns. And so that's really kind of like, especially with when you're power washing and you have like a lot of exposure to that chemical, you want to make sure that the product that you're using is as safe as possible. So this kind of leads into the next point of personal protective equipment. And so this is definitely kind of a hot topic in cleaning, disinfecting cannabis facilities. In terms of personal protective equipment, we realize that it's an important part of, I guess, cleaning and disinfection, but ideally we'll be working with products that don't require the use of PPE. And I know, Troy, I think you have some experience with this.
Yeah, for sure. Like
PPE, so I'll kind of let you jump in and comment.
Yeah, so even tying it into the isopropyl, the kind of the WSPS Labor Board initiative of this year. So let's say your facility, you're using an excessive amount of isopropyl, maybe an employee gets sick, they call the board, you get your air tested, it failed. So you have three options. Your first option is to completely change your HVAC throughout your facility so you have better ventilation. As you know, in a cannabis facility, that's basically not possible. Your second option would be to implement a full respirator program, which is where this comes in. Those respirators can be about like $1,500 a year, and you have to have log books of when they're being cleaned and sanitized and disinfected and storage and the filters being changed. And it actually will make your process a lot more difficult to manage. And your third option is to change products. And what's interesting is a lot of these companies, when they get that slap on the wrist for having that overexposure of isopropyl alcohol, they'll instantly just buy respirators and kind of be like, oh, now we have to use these respirators. But instead, it's like, maybe take a step back and see what's another product, or maybe even another way to use your current product to reduce that. And even another example I have of that is we have products that are in veterinarian clinics. Matt's probably much more familiar with this. But so birds have very sensitive respiratory airways. So even with our product that is not toxic to humans, even dogs and cats, just having the particles in the air, it actually was kind of irritating the birds and they would cough and maybe get sick. So what we looked at is, okay, our product is pretty much the safest one out there. Why don't we use it differently in order to reduce that negative impact? So instead of actually spraying it in the air, we could apply it to a wipe and wipe surfaces, or even foam it, which reduces that aerosolization. And now the birds are happy, and you can still use that same product. So it's never a good issue, never a good option to just go right to PPE. Like you could be putting a respirator on that bird, for example. It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and I mean, even in you mentioned animal health, and that's one where we've seen people using these products in really confined spaces, like if it's a dog kennel or an area like that, where you're in a pretty enclosed environment. And so that's really where we get into looking at those different ways of applying the chemical so that you don't have to jump right to the PPE.
Exactly. It really should be your last resort because it's not cheap, especially right now either. So really, this is really breaking it down as simple as possible as how easy it can be to disinfect with a one-step product. So no matter what kind of product you're using, you want to do what we call a dry clean, which is kind of removing the visible soil. So a lot of times that could be a sweep. Some facilities have like air sprayers that if you have like a table that has grates that you can spray that, but really just get rid of that easy to remove soil. Next step, so apply that disinfectant, and that's where you have a lot of your options. So when we're working with customers trying to help them with their protocols, we have kind of three different ways of applying the product. You can soak equipment, so that's really great for resins at the end of the process. So if you have a big trimmer, automated trimmer, even the handheld trimmers, let that soak for a bit. Yeah, you could do that. So you can do that. You can spray, as I mentioned before, which is a great option. The issue with that is it's a little bit hard to control a liquid spray. Like it can spray off, get bounce off the wall. So you don't want to be doing that around plants. You could use a pre-saturated or a dry microfiber and apply it kind of through a wipe like that, which is really great when the plants are in the room. It's really great for small surfaces and your high touch surfaces. I guess the only downfall there is that we see in the industry is you're throwing a wipe every so often. So it does have a little bit more of the environmental impact. But lastly, one that really has been taken off is foaming applications. So why foaming is so great, as I actually mentioned before, it's not going to aerosolize in the air as much, so you're not going to have really any contamination there. it's going to stick to your wall. So foam, if you're foaming a wall, you can actually see where you've hit, and it's not going to drip down to the bottom like a liquid would. And that's a really big benefit, especially if you're going like undergrow tables, as you can imagine. I've actually seen customers on a skateboard with wipes under the table going like that and just dripping down on them. Doesn't look fun. Whereas with a foaming gun, you can foam right under the table and it'll stay there. So you have different options of doing that. Either way, you want to make sure that again it's going to be contacting the surface for that contact time. And then lastly, you have a few options. You can allow that contact time you met and let it dry. However, if you are dealing with a surface that's going to directly contact cannabis, so that trimming equipment, maybe there's a scale you're putting your cannabis directly on, anywhere where it's directly contacting, you're required to rinse. As actually Matt touched on before, the regulations, you can't let any residues from your cleaning products or even any of like the liquid contact it. So you'd be really sure on any of the contact surfaces. So one of the last parts of the 7 steps is training, and it's something that we take really seriously. One of the reasons why we're doing this today, and we like to do this for all of our customers, sit down with the team using it, explain to them why their management has decided to use this product, what they should expect to see, and then work with them to get to those results. And it's really good, if you are upper management, to listen to your team and get feedback from them. You might think that this process you made is really smooth and everyone likes it. If you sit down, they might say, hey, it really sucks, getting under those tables and with a wipe, and it's not fun. And maybe you can work together to optimize that process. So accessibility is another one that is really overlooked, especially in the cannabis industry. So if you can imagine isopropyl, if you're familiar, it has there's flame-proof lockers that it's in. They're usually locked. So it's 4 o'clock. Your manager comes over to you and says, hey, can you go clean this grow room? It should take around an hour. If you have to actually go find a key, unlock that locker, get your isopropyl, dilute it, then go into the room and use it, you're trying to get out at 5, you're probably going to cut corners, you might not dilute it properly, and overall the process takes longer. Whereas your manager says, okay, go clean that room. You have a dilution station there, fully accessible outside the room. You go, you fill a bottle, you clean that room, you're still out by 4:45. There's less chances you're going to cut those corners. You're going to do the job right, and everyone's happier. You're out on time. The product is accessible to anyone. Even if you just want to clean a quick spill, you don't have to go find your supervisor to get that key, and that is really important. So the last part of the overall process is validation and compliance. So how are you ensuring that your process is working as intended? So there's a couple of ways to do this, and there's different ways to do this throughout the process. So kind of one of the most common ones we see is ATP testing. So that's a really good, quick and dirty method in process to see how your rooms are doing. So how this works is, let's say you have, we're trying to clean a table. So you're going to swab the table first, and it's going to give you an RLU number, which is relative light units. So basically, if there's bacteria or pathogens on the surface, it's going to react with an enzyme in this meter, and it'll emit light, and the meter will read how much light was emitted. So you swab the surface first. Let's say you get about 10,000. You record that. Then you're going to go clean and disinfect the room. If you're QA, you're going to come back and you're going to swab the surface again, and you want that to be reduced by a certain percentage or below a certain number, depending on how you set your system up. And you're going to keep a logbook of that, and then if Health Canada comes in for an audit, and they say, okay, so you said you cleaned this room, prove it. And you can say, well, then it's a lot of it's on the cloud data. It's pretty secure, almost like a lab management system. So it's tough to lie. Anyway, so Health Canada will go in there. They'll be like, wow, you're doing a great job. You have all the data to back it up. They really can't, put you in a corner in that case. They can't argue with that. There are other methods as well. We see micro testing, and that's really good in conjunction with ATP, either when you're setting up your ATP program or, maybe after a while your ATP is starting to go up in certain rooms and you can't figure out why. You can take a micro swab, send it to a lab. They won't only tell you, how much of whatever is there, but it also tell you what is causing it. And that's the benefit of the micro result over ATP. You can get an actual, it's a fungi or it's a bacteria or maybe even the exact species of that. However, at the only issue with micro is that it might take a couple more days. So you don't want to be doing that kind of if you're waiting to open a room and you want that validation. And the last thing we have there is a test strip, which is available for many disinfectants. We have it for Shield as well, and it's pretty much like a hot tub test strip. So you can dip it in, you wait 30 seconds, and you match the color to validate if the dilution was correct. And there's many ways you can use this. So one way you can use it is if you're hand diluting, you want to make sure it's good. You can use the strip. Okay, it's validated. Another way, as I mentioned, dilution systems earlier. So it'd be like a system to your wall. You go pull a knob and it dilutes the product for you. So we a lot of our customers, we set them up with like a logbook. So daily they can just check the pressure on the system is correct. Once a week, you can go use this test strip to validate that it's diluting properly. And then you create that logbook. So again, Health Canada comes in. You can show them, hey, I have all my ATP results for all my rooms, and I have all this logbook that shows that I've been validating the dilution of my disinfectant that's being used when cleaning these rooms, and we've got very good feedback from that. So key takeaway from here is pretty much give Health Canada as much data as you possibly can. That's good data, of course, but and it really helps if you're trying to back up your point or even attack them for whatever reason. You want data, and it's really important to have. So that sums it up for our presentation. I did see some questions in the chat, so I think Lara was going to go over those with us. There she is.
Yes, we did have a few questions come in. Now, our first one, they're asking about what does the process look like when getting a new disinfectant approved by Health Canada for use in cannabis LPs?
Okay, so it was a tough one. So let's say, so with Virox, so we had AHPs. So we have like a technology that we're able to tweak and tailor to different industries. So we kind of had a head start. Let's say right now, all of us in this chat, we have a new technology we want to bring in. So we'd have to probably do a year or two of formulation to see in a lab if it will actually kill the bacteria before you go to the next step. So let's say 2 years for that. Once you're happy with that, then you're actually going to go do your GLP data generation. So that can take Matt, you might be familiar too, like 1 or 2 years for that GLP testing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's basically proving everything that you want on your label. So if you want to say, hey, it's not toxic, then you have to do your toxicity data to prove that. You have to prove that you can kill these bacteria, these viruses, and all of that. Once you've done that, so you have 4 years, and let's just say it's all gone well, then you're going to have to submit to Health Canada, which usually takes about 9 months for them to get back to you with a yes or no. With the Shield product, just because it said cannabis on it, it took about a year. They had a lot more questions than normally, but we made it through, and it's not the first time we had to do it, but it was probably the most challenging.
Well, our next question, and this actually, we might need to circle back and talk a bit more about the concept of contact time, because the question was, if you don't feel safe, can you increase the contact time?
So that's from Mr. Wonderful. Is Kevin O'Leary in here? Should I learn about cannabis? I'm watching some Shark Tank. I've been hearing that a lot. Yeah, a little bit. I'm not sure about the feel safe concept. So contact time, again, it's when you look at that data generation. So we've done GLP testing that shows, okay, there's salmonella on this plate. After 3 minutes of Shield, it's gone. So I guess if you wanted to go to a 5-minute contact time there, like, you're welcome to, and that's fine, but you don't need to. Yeah, if that wasn't clear, feel free to ask that question again. I'm not sure if I answered that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely, makes sense. Now, our next question came in from Jamie, who is asking, are there any all-natural sanitation solutions used in cannabis facilities that you know of?
Yeah, I guess depends on what your term all-natural is. Like, for example, Shield, the product that we brought to market, it's pretty much as close as you can get to all-natural. So like hydrogen peroxide, most people are familiar with, it breaks down to water and oxygen. So that's pretty natural. And then all of the other ingredients in our formula are on the generally regarded as safe list. So, and there's, I know they're mostly organic. So I'd say there probably is others. I know I'd say Shield has probably fall into that. The issue with the actual term natural is Health Canada, I believe, will not let you put natural on a disinfectant. So I guess no one would actually say they're an all natural, but they're like, I guess you could say a green disinfectant or environmentally friendly.
Yeah, just to kind of jump in there, I think when comparing different disinfectants, another thing to think about is biodegradability of chemical formulation. Some disinfectants are the liquid used is biodegradable, really kind of minimizing that environmental footprint. Whereas some other chemicals that are kind of out there in the environment leave behind active residues on the surface. So there's a low level of the active ingredient that might be left behind. And that could potentially present some concerns if that gets into the environment.
And while we're on this topic, actually, there is another question where they're looking for a little more clarification as to the active ingredient in Shield. So could you explain a little bit more about what is accelerated hydrogen peroxide?
Sure. So accelerated hydrogen peroxide, basically we've found a way to harness the power of classical hydrogen peroxide. So combining that with surfactants that give us some superior cleaning ability, as we've mentioned. And there's also, let's say organic acids that are going to help with the pH, chelating agents that are going to help with the stability. It is a patented formula, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but basically it's everything inside of it is synergistic. It's working together. And if you want to compare to classical hydrogen peroxide, so classical hydrogen peroxide, if we wanted to deactivate poliovirus with that at 3% hydrogen peroxide, it would require a pre-clean, and it would take about 45 minutes to deactivate poliovirus. So, you're going to have to apply that, let's say 9 times. With accelerated hydrogen peroxide, we'll even use the Shield brand as an example. You do not require a pre-clean to deactivate that poliovirus, and it'll deactivate it in 3 minutes at 0.5% hydrogen peroxide. So a much lower concentration of hydrogen peroxide and much more efficient. And that's why it's much safer to use for, yourself, on your equipment, around animals, the environment, but also it'll get rid of that bacteria, viruses, and fungi really efficiently.
And our next question, and this one might be for you, Matt. The question is, have you published any results comparing your products against competitor products in any peer-reviewed journals? So if there's any resources that we can send after the fact that you can think of, Matt, we'll be sure to share those.
Yeah. So the answer is definitely yes. We do have peer-reviewed studies out there looking at AHP versus competitive chemistries. And I don't know how we want to, like, if we're providing contact information or how would the best way to reach out with that would be, but we can definitely
comment a link in the comments right now if anyone wants to pull that up, just our resources on our website.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll send all of those over after so that you'll be able to take a look at those. And our very last question, it looks like. Yep, there we go. Last question. Our last question is about contact time again. So
okay, here we go. Yeah. Can we reduce the contact time?
Yeah.
Well, you could, but then technically you would not be compliant. So in the U.S., it's a offense or federal offense. I'm not sure what if you do not follow your label of the disinfectant. Canada, we're a bit friendlier. It's not as strict, but if Health Canada were to come in and give you an audit and look at your label and see a 5-minute contact time and then watch your process and see a 4-minute that you're following, you would technically be uncompliant and they would give you a slap on the wrist. So the answer to that question is, if you do feel unsafe with the product you use, find a different product that's safer to use.
I think that's probably very good advice.
Yeah.
Well, that concludes today's webinar. So thank you so much to everybody who tuned in. Thank you to Troy and Matt. If you have any other questions, please visit shielddisinfectants.com. There's also the link that Troy shared with you, and we will be sure to share any resources that we referenced today. So thank you again to everybody who tuned in, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you very much.